Way back in the 1900s, when I was in seminary, I lived in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I call it Dirty Myrtle. And so there's no reason to go there. If you do decide to go, make sure you have your tetanus shots up to date, please, okay? So I had 3 different jobs. I waited tables at Barefoot Landing. I worked at a gym. I opened up the gym. It's called World's Gym. I was like the front desk guy. And I was a youth pastor at a very Southern Baptist, First Baptist church. And because I worked 3 jobs and I never had time off, and I had to write my sermons, and so I would do it at the desk at World's Gym. Now, the guy that owned the World's Gym in North Myrtle Beach, he was a smart guy, and so what he did is directly across the street was a strip club called the Crazy Horse. And so he went to the Crazy Horse and he says, "Girls, I'll make you a deal. You girls can work out for free at the World's Gym." And so pretty much every day at about 10:30 a.m., all the strippers would come bebopping in. And then we would charge about $50 a head for every hormonal dude in North Myrtle Beach, and they would show up too. But at first, when these girls would come in, I was like, oh my, you know? And then what began to happen over time is when they would get finished working out, they would come sit at the desk and they would ask for protein smoothies. I was the protein sommelier. And then they would just sit up there at the counter and everybody'd hang out. And what began to happen very quickly is those girls became my friends. And as I was sitting there, they'd be like, "What are you doing?" I have my Bible out, have my notes out, and I'm like, "Well, I'm working on my youth sermon." So I said, "Let me run it by you real quick," because I thought if I could connect with the strippers, then maybe I could connect with the 10th graders, you know what I mean? And I found out all these things about these girls, man. None of them really wanted to do this. This was not their plan A. They all thought it would be very temporary, but in North Myrtle Beach, with all the scuzz buckets that go down there for golf trips, they made tons of money. And then they began to feel trapped because they had so much money and they didn't know, it was the only way, their source of income. Almost all of them had kids. None of their kids knew what they did, so they had this whole lie about what their actual job is. Virtually all of them had to drink something, take something, ingest something so that they could do what they did because there was a whole bunch of shame there. They would always invite me to come see them at work. "Why don't you come see me at work?" I'd be like, that's not gonna happen. I'd say, "But why don't you come see me at work? Why don't you come to church with me?" And for months, everybody's like, "Nah, we're not going to church." And then one day, one of the girls said, "I'll go to church with you." And I thought, oh crap. Now that'd be no problem here at this church, but at my church, we didn't have Bring a Stripper Sunday, you know what I mean? Like there was a dress code, if you know what I mean. I got in trouble because I didn't own a suit, and a blue blazer and khakis was business casual, and that's not what the Lord deserves according to this church. Now, I can't find a dress code in here except for the priest in the Old Testament, but that's the church I worked at. I was trying to talk her out of going. Her name was Sunshine. I was like, "All right, Sunshine, here's the thing. I got to get there real early because I'm kind of a big deal. I do the announcements. So we got to leave at like 7:30. She's like, "No problem. I'll come pick you up." And she comes rolling up in her convertible white Corvette. And she had a personalized license plate that said "Topless Fun." Convertible Corvette. And that must be what it meant, right? And so we were very illegal because she had her daughter with us. There was only 2 seats. I don't think seatbelts were a thing back then because, Gen X was tough. And so the 3 of us pile in her Corvette. I was like, "At least let me drive." So I drove. It's normally like a 40-minute ride. It took 23 minutes to get there. We went fast. And we go walking into First Baptist. And we dropped her kid off in Sunday school. And then she and me and Sunshine, go walking into the church. Now listen, man. She had on what she would have thought was her Sunday best, but it was not the dress code that this church required. She just had a little sundress on, and she was heavily invested into her career, if you understand. Don't think about that too much. And then we go walking in, and you could feel the stares. And you could hear the whispers. And I did my announcements, and I sat down next to her on the front row, and I have no idea what the dude talked about. I know he preached out of the Bible. And then when the service was over, one of the deacons came up to me and says, "Hey, I need to meet with you." And so he said, "Hey, we need to meet in the pastor's office." So I go back into the pastor's office. I told Sunshine, "Go pick up your kid. I'll meet you at the car in just a second. This will only take a minute." And we walked in, and one of the deacons looked at me and said, "Why in the world would you bring a girl like that here?" He went on to tell me this place exists to protect our children from people like that. And I wish I could tell you that I stood firm against the devil and his evil schemes. And I wish I could tell you that I stood with the confidence of the good news of the gospel. And I wish I could tell you that I did not seek the applause of man, but the applause of God. But I didn't do any of those things. And I thought more about my career in ministry than anything else. And so I just bowed my head and said, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. And I walked out. And I go to the car, and all the cars are gone out of the parking lot except the convertible white Corvette. And Sunshine's leaning against it with these really cool Ray-Bans on with just tears rolling. And she says, that was about me, wasn't it? I said, no. And I lied. It's like, oh, we had a casserole mishap in the fellowship hall or something. So we get in the car and we're riding back. Her daughter's sitting in her lap, coloring a picture of Jesus that she got from Sunday school. And the silence was just deafening. And so I didn't know what to say. So I said, so what'd you think about church? And she said, that's the most humiliated I've ever been in my entire life. In the house of God that was sent forth by Christ to preach the good news that God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten son, that whosoever would believe would receive the right to become a child of God. That 3 days before this, she's drinking something to get drunk enough to take all of her clothes off in front of a bunch of dirty men on a pole for $1 at a time. And that wasn't as humiliating as the way she got treated at church. I don't even have a good end to the story, man. It was the end of the season. About 3 days later, she packed everything up and moved on to the next place, and I never saw her again. And I'm telling you, my failure haunted me, but I got really good news, man. Failure's not final. And so I decided, I made a promise to God, God, if you ever put me in charge of one of these things, then it will be a movement for all people to discover and deepen a relationship with Jesus, and especially the sunshines of this world. And listen, man, if you've ever been beaten up by a church, I am so sorry. And I'm not like the Pope of evangelicalism. I don't get to speak for every church, but that's not what Jesus came, bled, and died for, and that is not what the church is supposed to be about.